be on my top 5 list, but which one, you may ask? Well, I say most people consider Case 4 from the first game to be the best one, the suicide one with a lot of interesting twists as everyone tries to hide the truth for various reasons. I've always liked that Case 2, but there's always been one other one that's really grabbed me by the heartstrings and took me by surprise in more ways than one. This might be one of the more controversial picks on the list, but...
Everybody want to be a bodybuilder?
I remember the first ever exposure I ever got to Danganronpa was through a Let's Play of the first game I saw maybe around 2014 by the user Kate Lovely Momo. I didn't really think much of the game at first, but this trial is where it finally clicked, and I knew that this game was going to be something special. Between the setup, the mystery, and the trial itself, I knew that this was going to be no ordinary murder mystery game. The victim for this case is this kid named Chihiro, found hung up in the girl's locker room, and the way she was hung up seems to resemble the way a particular serial killer finishes off its victims as well. This leads to probably the first major thing I enjoy about this case, and that's its amazing use of a red herring. Typically, I tend to hate these in trials. I find they often just exist to waste time and derail the conversation, as we'll see later. But here, it actually makes a lot of sense. It is revealed that one of the characters actually has a split personality with an infamous killer known as Genocide Jill. Characters are quick to give her a reasonable motive as way to make up things and dwell on topics that amount to absolutely nothing just to pad out the runtime. It's always just been the most frustrating thing to me. Just to pad out the runtime, it's always just been the most frustrating thing to me. The actual case and murder itself are discussed and solved around the middle of the entire trial. If this was all there was to it, I won't lie, I'd actually kind of enjoy this case quite a lot. But the missteps start right away of a little arcade game called Twilight Syndrome Murder Case. Yes, you heard me right, an arcade game. In pretty much every chapter of the series, Monokuma introduces a motive to help the killing game along, and the one for this trial was an arcade game that depicted a murder in and of itself. I've always found it to come completely out of nowhere, and it's tied to the actual trial to be menial at best. They spend so much time talking about it, though, to the point of it getting pretty frustrating. They essentially just thrusted a second murder onto you that you need to solve on top of the one you already have, and it's always came off as a massive waste of time. You know what else I've always hated about this arcade machine? The fact that all of the characters in it are just called Girl A, Girl B, Girl C, etc. It's almost as if they couldn't really be bothered themselves. Once that's out of the way, however, I have to admit that for as simple as this case is, I found it to be pretty creative. How the body was used to block the door, how the killer escaped, and how they used water bottles of all things to wash off blood was actually quite clever. As soon as they figure things out, however, things start to go downhill again. Like I mentioned, the killer for this trial was the sword lady, and for whatever reason, shortly after everything is solved, she has this really weird breakdown where she takes this helm of like a serial killer called Sparkling Justice and starts claiming that she's an object for some reason. My god, I've always hated this part. I think the idea is that they were trying to make a tie between the first and second game by once again introducing a serial killer in the second trial, but here it just seems so lazy. I mean, just look at this mask. When Genocide Jill was introduced, she was an interesting major character of unique sprites and everything, but here they just pasted a mask onto Pekko's face. It's so dumb, and it doesn't even amount to anything either. When you strip away all the fat, suddenly this entire trial has the complexity and length of something you'd probably expect to be a first case. In fact, thinking about it, it probably should have been the first case, to be honest. Like, seriously, hear me out. Aside from the Fuyuhiko stuff, what exactly does this case bring to the table in the grand scheme of things? Kinda nothing, am I right? So why not swap the first and second case, cut out all the nonsense, let it be a simple introductory case of a straightforward murderer that doesn't even break a half hour, and then maybe give us a little longer with some of the weirder characters to prove that this is a game that's willing to play with your expectations. I feel that would actually flow a lot better. But that's not what we got. Instead, we got a case that's way too bloated for its own good, that has no grasp on how to stay on topic. Such a shame, too. I'm actually one of those guys who genuinely believes that Mahiro and Pekko were pretty underutilized, and this case does not do either of them justice. Just remember to stay on topic, everyone, because just because something is bigger does not always mean it's better. Have you ever noticed that specifically the fourth case in all three of these games is typically when things begin to get a bit more meta? Almost as if after case 3, the devs always feel the urge to start getting a bit more creative with what exactly they can get away with in terms of location, tone, and in some cases, even what technically counts as a murder. And aside from a couple exceptions, they always manage to pull this off really well. Trials where the murder was actually a suicide, trials where the victim isn't known until the very end, trials where the killing took place in a VR game. Some of these later cases are nothing short of legendary, as they change up the formula and sometimes even demand you think about situations differently from the ground up to make sense of everything. This is one of my absolute favorite ones. You bought peach rings. A murder at a fun fair, that's pretty unique. A murder in a giant fruit-themed fun house at a fun fair, pretty dang unusual and unique. But even that's not strange enough for Danganronpa. Game 2 Case 4 is a murder that takes place inside of a giant fruit-themed tower that's deliberately designed to be as confusing as possible, to the point at which knowledge about the tower is, in and of itself, a powerful weapon. Welcome to the Strawberry House and the Grape House. From a purely logical standpoint, this may very well be among the hardest cases in the entire series to wrap your head around. Everything from understanding time discrepancies to a profound knowledge of spatial recognition. Like, seriously, you will never think of an octagon the same way again. It's a case that demands a lot from you in order to understand everything about it. And that's exactly why I love it. The victim is this giant teen coach guy who was turned into a robot after Monokuma accidentally killed him. Yes, he was brought back to life. He essentially dies twice, you know? My god, this case is so weird and I love it. I also appreciate exactly how this case goes about attempting to confuse you as well. Given the unusual nature of the tower, just about every student has their own little theory as to how it's structured, as well as how the murder was actually committed. This is common in Danganronpa, however it feels incredibly realistic here due to how inherently unrealistic the actual scenario is. You'll hear different theories about where the two houses are in relation to each other, where the representative towers are in relation to them, how its elevators work, and even how it moves. This is the kind of thing I normally hate a trial for, focusing on things aside from the murder itself, but in this case it all makes sense, as knowing the structure of the funhouse is essential to comprehending the actual murder. For the murder, what the culprit did was lure the victim to a secluded area. He did this by setting every clock in the tower back so their alarms would go off later. This was done so the victim's internal clock would guarantee he was the only one awake at the time. Once alone with him, he shut down his body and then tied him up to the handle of one of the towers. The tower, by the way, is a massive elevator that goes up and down, which is something the tower itself tries to hide. The culprit then changed the elevation so the victim would be suspended above the entire elevator shaft, at which point he wakes up, unties himself in confusion, and dies from the inevitable fall. Quite the murder plot, and the journey to actually get to this conclusion is quite